Are you a newer player to DPP OU and you're struggling with team building? Then this is going to be the video for you. I'm going to go over the 7 rules of team building and as well give you some tips at the end on how I like to think about team building. Now, if you're a bit more of an intermediate or an advanced player, you're probably going to already know most of the stuff I'm going to say in this video, so you might want to skip over it. In the end, I'm going to leave some tips. They could be beneficial to you, but this is more so tailored at newer players. So not only newer in the sense of new to the tier, but also just new players in general. So this is going to be for you. So these are going to be my 7 rules that you need to know in order to start building at least decent teams. And with that, as you become more experienced in team building and more experienced in the tier, you can start to break some of these rules. But starting out, these are the 7 rules you want to tick off every single one when you're making a team. So let's get into it. Rule number 1, probably the most simple of them all, and you might already know this as a newer player, is you want to have Stealth Rock on every single team. Stealth Rock is the best move in the game. It keeps some of the most broken shit in check, like Gyarados, Zapdos. Punishes the opponent for switching. Right? You just want Stealth Rock on every single team. There's no reason not to have it. So rule number 1, very easy. Make sure one of your Pokemon has Stealth Rock. And it's not hard to fit on a team. There are so many ground and steel types that learn this move that you're going to have on your team anyway. So just make sure one of them has Stealth Rock. And this is probably the most hard set in stone rule out of all of them, because as you go on, you'll see that some of these rules can be broken a little bit as you move into more advanced levels. But even at an advanced level, you still want Stealth Rock on every single team. There's only been a few examples where I've ever built a team without Stealth Rock. And that was either one on like Hyper Offense, where I was just like, maybe it'd be better if I just had another setup sweeper. And number 2 is I've tried on Hail Offense a couple of times, where again, I'm like, maybe instead of Stealth Rock, I'm just better off with a 4th move. But were the teams actually good or not? Probably not. Would I ever recommend it in a serious tournament game? Probably not. Stealth Rock on every single team. That's the number 1 rule, okay? Number 2 rule in DPP OU, okay, is you're going to see, and we're going to reference the sample teams here. Not that I think that every sample team is perfect, but they're going to do a good job of illustrating my points. Is 2 steals on every single team, or at the bare minimum, actually I'll explain why first. 2 steals on every single team because of dragon types. That's number 1. And then the second reason is steals just have so many, especially in Gen 4 or Gen 5, before Gen 6, before steals lost their resistance to dark and steel type, dark and ghost type, is steals just have crazy resistances. They just got, number 1 being dragon is probably the most important because if you don't have a steel type on your team, you're going to get murdered by dragons. Then also 2, defensively, they have heaps of other resistances as well, right? So the big one being dragon. You need something to take a Specs Latias Draco Meteor. You need something to take an Outrage, right? Without it, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. There are a couple of exceptions, right? There's 2 exceptions where you can get away with not having 2 steals. One is if you run a Steel and Blissey, because Blissey is fantastic at taking Draco Meteors, so you can often get away with running 1 Steel if you're running a Blissey. You wouldn't want to do it all the time, but you can get away with it. And the other one is 1 Steel and Tyranitar, because again, Tyranitar with the Sand boost, the 1.5 times special defense that it gets in Sand, makes it a really good sponge of Draco Meteors. So you either want 2 Steels, or a Steel and Tar, or a Steel and Blissey. The biggest problem though is if you go a Steel and Tar or a Steel and Blissey, is then you open yourself up to dragons on the physical side. So now you're going to start having probably issues with like a Dragon Dance Dragonite, or like CB Dragonite or a CB Flygon. If you've only got one steel and then Blissey and your Tyranitar is your other pseudo steel, then it's going to make it very hard for you to deal with that. So always starting out, make sure your team has 2 steals. Okay, so when you look at these teams here, even the hyper offense teams like this from X-Skull, right? Tyranitar, Metagross, Empoleon. Magnezone, Tyranitar, Metagross. Empoleon, Metagross, Tyranitar. I wouldn't count lead Skarmory as a steal because it is a steel type, but you can't use it to really tank moves because it's a suicide lead. So it's not going to be taking moves long term. But you got Heatran, Scizor. Skarmory, Tyranitar, again, you got a stack Skarmory here in the lead spot, so again, wouldn't really classify that as a steal. But again, you got your Jirachi and your Tyranitar, right? So all these teams here, and the Zapme balance here, it's got a Tyranitar and a Jirachi. Okay, again, Tyranitar, Jirachi, Magneton, Jirachi. So you can see here, they've all got 2 steel types because steel gives you so many resistances. Obviously, Dragon is the number 1 reason, but all the other resistances steel gives you 2. So definitely starting out, and I'd say this is not as set in stone as Stealth Rock, but even as an advanced player, like I don't think I've ever built a good team without either 2 steals, or a Tyranitar and a steel, or a Blissey and a steel. So it's almost as locked in as important as having Stealth Rock on every single team, in my opinion. So you want that. Number 3 is you don't want a defensive Pokemon that is weak to Stealth Rock on your team without spin support. Okay, so I'll say that again because I kind of messed it up a bit. A defensive Pokemon that is SR weak, so like a defensive Zapdos, you must run it with spin support. Okay? Now, offensive Pokemon are different. Offensive Pokemon function differently. So you can see here on BKC's Water Spam, you have an offensive Pokemon that is Stealth Rock weak, but it doesn't really matter as much on an offensive team because you're expecting the Pokemon to get in less over the turn of battle. Like a Zapdos is there, a defensive Zapdos is there to ideally last a long time during battle. Whereas an offensive Pokemon like CB Gyarados, it's realistically just going to get in a handful of times and just dish off big damage, right? It's not designed to stick around long term. And if you have a defensive Pokemon like Zapdos that is weak to Stealth Rock, it's not going to be able to do its job defensively because every time it comes in, it's going to lose 25% of its health. So you don't have to pair, although it does help, you don't have to pair offensive Stealth Rock weak Pokemon with Spin, but you always want to be pairing defensive Pokemon with Spin because they just can't do their job effectively and tank moves if every time they try and come in and take a move, they're taking an extra 25% on top of that. It's just too much. They can't stick around long term. Now, again, like as you get more advanced, you might be able to build a team without spin support for a defensive Stealth Rock weak Pokemon, but definitely starting out, I would not be building anything that is SR weak without spin support. And you can see here again on some of the offensive teams, right? Now, this hyper offense team, it has a Zalf with Taunt to try and stop the rocks. But even if rocks do go up, it's not like Gyarados and Dragonite are trying to stick around long-term taking hits. They're just getting in, dishing out as much damage as they can, and fainting, right, essentially. Where's another example? Double Water by Pico. Again, it's got a Dragonite, it's got the Skarmory with Taunt, but it doesn't matter too much if rocks go up. And then here, there's not too many examples. There's only 2 Zapme teams in here. But again, both times Zapdos run, it's used with a Starmie, and it's used with a Starmie for a reason because Zapdos is so much better without rocks. Another example of a Stealth Rock weak defensive Pokemon is Restort Gyarados. There's no samples here, but you You always see a Rest Talk Gyarados, not always, but most of the time, being run with a Donphan. Or back in the day, it used to be run with a Forretress. Because if you don't have that, if you don't get rid of rocks, it can't do its job properly in terms of tanking moves. So, ideally, right, or not ideally, but whenever you're building a team, don't put a Zapdos without a defensive Zapdos without spin support. It's offensive Zapdos, okay, that can work. Don't put a Rest Talk Gyarados without spin support, right? You get where I'm coming from here. Number 4, you need status absorption, okay? So, because you're going to be heavy on steals, you're always going to have toxic resists. So, no team really needs to worry about, do I have a Pokemon that can tank toxic, because you're going to have that with 2 steals. But you need to be thinking about too, like, do I have a Pokemon that can take Thunder Wave? Do I have a Pokemon that can take Will-O-Wisp? Right? You don't need to worry about sleep anymore. But yeah, you need to be like, okay, do I have something that can switch into a Rotom's Will-O-Wisp? Do I have something that can switch into a Clefable's Thunder Wave, or a Jirachi's Thunder Wave, or a Jirachi's Body Slam? You might not necessarily be immune to it, but it might not matter if that Pokemon gets paralyzed or burnt, for example. So, yeah, this can be done through, you can absorb status through typing. So let's just say you're an Infernape, or you are immune to Will-O-Wisp, right? You can be immune to status through an ability. So like Heatran has Flash Fire. You can be immune to Thunder Wave. Where's a Clefable? Right? Another example of an ability is Thunder Wave, Magic Guard. None of the statuses affect it. Well, Thunder Wave actually cuts its speed, but it doesn't have any of the other drawbacks of paralysis. You can resist status through berries. So that's why you see, like on a lot of hyper offense teams. Now, this doesn't have any Pokemon that can take Will-O-Wisp or take a Thunder Wave, but it has Lumberry on 2 Pokemon, right? So berries are another way that you can be immune to status. And the other way you can be immune to status, not immune to it, but not see the effects of it as much, is Rest Talk, or a Pokemon with Rest. Now, I don't know if there's any sample teams with Rest Talkers in here, but that's another way that you can get around status, is if your Pokemon has Rest. And then, of course, the lesser used option people can use that is a bit more niche is Heal Bell to help. And sorry, the other one that I'm missing out on ability is Natural Cure. So Pokemon like Starmie, Celebi, Blissey. Blissey's a really good Pokemon that can switch into status and get out. You need to be thinking of, okay, on a team, how can I deal with status? Because if you don't have a Thunder Wave switch in, Jirachi will just come through and Thunder Wave your whole team. If you don't have something that can take a Will-O-Wisp, Rotom will just spread burns throughout your whole team. So when looking at these teams, you can see on Hyper Offense here, even though it doesn't necessarily have any abilities that absorb status, it doesn't have any typing apart from Steel that absorbs status, you have the Lumberries. Then if you look at, what's another good example? Here, PK's Double Water Team, right? It has something that can come in on Will-O-Wisp. So Heatran is a perfect example of something that can come in on a Will-O-Wisp for a Gengar and a Will-O-Wisp from a Rotom. And even better is it can come in on both Rotom and Gengar's Will-O-Wisp because it's Choice Scarf and it can outspeed the Gengar. You've got something that can come in on a Thunder Wave, and not only come in on a Thunder Wave, but also threaten common Thunder Wave users. For example, Clefable, Jirachi, Swampert comes in on them, Thunder Wave. Also, another cool way you can get around paralysis really well is pairing a ground type with a ghost type. So because Jirachi can commonly run Thunder Wave and or Body Slam, when you run a ground type with a ghost type, you cover Jirachi's paralysis from both ends, because now you have a Body Slam switch and now you have a Thunder Wave switch, right? You've got 2 steel types on your team. You've got naturally something that can take toxic. I'll find another example. Here, another example. Clefable. You've got something that can come in on anything. It can come in on paralysis. It can come in on burn, right? And another thing too is having a poison type on your team is really good too, because then you can have a way to absorb toxic spikes. So those are some of the ways you can deal with status: is ability, typing, rest, and berries. So you want to be able to figure out, okay, if a Pokemon is status, I need to be able to have something that can reliably come into it. And before I go to the next point, it doesn't necessarily have to be something that can, like for example, on this team, BKC's team doesn't necessarily, it's got a Lumberry Tyranitar, so I'll kind of take that back a little bit. But for example, there's nothing that can come in on a Jirachi's Thunder Wave. There is, sorry, but I'll go back a little bit. The Lumberry on Tyranitar isn't designed to take a Jirachi's Thunder Wave, because if Tyranitar does come in and take the Thunder Wave, well, it's forced straight back out by the Iron Head. The Lumberry is there for Rotom's Will-O-Wisp. But the Thunder Wave absorber on this team is Metagross, because Metagross isn't really affected too much by paralysis. Because if you look again at the common Thunder Wave users like a Clefable, a Celebi, or a Starmie, whatever, this Metagross, even if it gets paralyzed by them, it still has a good matchup against them. So you don't necessarily have to have a Pokemon that is immune to status, but it can still beat the Pokemon that are dishing it out. So in this team here, Metagross is your paralysis absorber, Tyranitar is your Will-O-Wisp absorber. And obviously you have Empoleon and Metagross as ways to take the toxic, which isn't that big of a deal. And sorry, this is another one. This is another thing I had in my notes, but I just realized then, Healing Wish, although it's not quite as ironclad as the other methods, Healing Wish can also bring back a Pokemon back to health as well. So that's another kind of niche way of dealing with status as well. But it's not going to be your main way of dealing with it. Number 5 thing you want is you want 2 times resist to every... I'm going to kind of change how I say this. You want at least a resistance to every type. And ideally you want at least 2 resistances to every type. But sometimes team building just doesn't end that way. Just try and get as many 2 times resistances as possible, right? So for example, okay, let's pick Zapmy Balance, right? Fire, you've got Starmie, Tyranitar, Rhyperior. Water, you've got Starmie, Celebi. Steel, you've got Zapdos, Jirachi. You kind of get the point I'm making here. You don't have to have 2 resistance to everything, but a well-built team will have a couple of resistances to most types. Now, starting out, this is a very basic way of looking at team building, but if you can just get your resistances right, you'll naturally cover a lot of Pokemon, and that's again why it's so important to have 2 steel types, because a large amount of your resistances are going to come from those 2 steel types. So try and get 2 times resistance to every type. If you can only get 1, it's not the end of the world, okay? But just try and do that at the start. That's just absolute beginner team building. Then as you move into like more intermediate, you're thinking about the Pokemon. So you're not necessarily thinking about types. So you're looking at the most common Pokemon in the tier, right? And you're like, okay, Tyranitar. Do I have at least like 1 or 2 Pokemon that check Tyranitar? And not just Tyranitar, like you're thinking like, okay, do I have a Pokemon that can deal with Dragon Dance Tyranitar? Do I have a Pokemon that can deal with Choice Band Tyranitar? Do I have a Pokemon that can deal with Choice Scarf Tyranitar? But this knowledge only comes through playing and learning the sets, right? Same with like something like a Starmie. Do I have something that can beat Defensive Starmie with Thunder Wave? Do I have something that can beat a Spec Starmie? Right, so you move from, as an intermediate, you move from thinking just purely about resistances into thinking about, do I at least have 1 to 2 ways to deal with each Pokemon and its common sets? And then as you move into more advanced team building, you counter via play style or counter via combinations. So for example, on your team, you might have 2 ways to beat Clefable, 2 ways to beat Hippowdon, 2 ways to beat Skarmory, but you can't beat Stall, because when those combination of 3 Pokemon are being used, you can't break through them because none of your Pokemon deals well into multiple or all three of them. Whereas a good example of that is if you had like a Grass Knot Infernape on your team, then you would have a Grass Knot Close Combat Fire Blast, you'd have a way to deal with all three. Where just because it beat each one individually doesn't mean you're going to beat the team. So as you move into more advanced team building, you move away from, so moving from beginner to intermediate is moving away from thinking just about the typing into thinking about, can I beat each individual Pokemon? And then from there, you're moving into combinations of Pokemon and team styles. And if you look at some of these teams here, right, a perfect example of this is BKC's Icroll Stall team. This is a very good team, even though it has no water resist. But it can still beat waters for a few reasons. One is you've got a specially defensive Tyranitar that just like that takes water hits like a champion as long as they're not specs. You've got a Clefable with max HP and max special defense, which takes waters quite well. And you also have a Nidoqueen, which lays down toxic spikes, which is one of the biggest ways to beat waters. And then you've also got a Skarmory that's full defensive. So that will deal with like a Dragon Dance Gyarados or a Dragon Dance Kingdra. And then obviously the Choice Scarf Rotom is a backup way to deal with the Dragon Dance Gyarados. So even though you have no water resist here, you can see how you deal with Gyarados. You deal with Gyarados by Choice Scarf Rotom, and you deal with it by Skarmory, and you deal with the other waters with a combination of Tyranitar, Clefable, and Nidoqueen. So, for example, a Suicune. A Suicune looks very dangerous on paper for this team, but if you can get your toxic spikes down, right, it's very easy to deal with. Even Clefable in sand is a very good chance to go 1v1 with most Suicunes, unless it's sub CM. And then you've also got a Rotom there that can come in and revenge kill it. So you can see here it's a team effort to take on the waters. So as you move out of that beginner phase, it pays to not. You still want to focus on resistances a little bit, but don't put too much into them. And Ajama was a player that was famous for running these teams that had no water resist, and he still did fantastic with them. But this is a prime example of one of those teams. The only real water looking at this team that it would have trouble with no water resist is Specs Empoleon. Because if you look here, if there's just say a Specs Starmie, it's strong, but like you can kind of protect, stall it a little bit with Clefable. You can get your toxic spikes up. It doesn't have enough special attack to Oko the Tyranitar, and if you got toxic spikes down, then you got a lot of Pokemon that can protect on it and chip it down, right? Same with Suicune, same with Kingdra. But if you look at Empoleon's the one that this team would really struggle with because it can't get hit by toxic spikes and it can't get hit by sand. So, but you can't. It's impossible to build a perfect team that covers everything. But like as a beginner player, you might look at this on paper and be like, "Oh, this is weak to waters," but it's not. All right, any water that is not specs isn't just going to break through this team immediately. Like a Starmie's non-spec Hydro Pump is just going to bounce off Clefable. It's probably going to barely do 50% to Tyranitar, right? So you can see what I mean here. So just to recap, and I've rambled on a little bit, is start off looking at typing as a beginner, then move into individual Pokemon. Are you beating each set, all the common sets? And then from there, you're thinking about, am I beating a team style or a combination of Pokemon as a whole, right? Now, the next thing you want is an Iron Head resist, right? Because if you don't have something that can consistently come in on a Jirachi's Iron Head, you will get cleaned up by it. It's one of those Pokemon that it's just something you need. And although I do believe right now Jirachi is not as good as it has been in the past, it's still you have to have a way to deal with it. So let's have a look here at how kind of each team deals with Iron Head Jirachi. So you can see here, this team deals with it by a Magnezone with leftovers. It can trap it, Thunder Wave it, whatever, but it also has a secondary answer in Metagross with leftovers. So in general, probably the gold standard way of dealing with Iron Head Jirachi is to have your own steel type with leftovers, because like if it iron heads Metagross, right, and it gets the flinch, it probably does like 10% to it, and it heals 6.25. So each turn it's only dealing like 3%. It's going to run out of PP before it beats your Metagross. Even if that Jirachi paralyzes you, it's still not going to get through you. Whereas if your Metagross, for example, was, let's just say Metagross was Sugarberry or whatever, right? If you Thunder Wave that Metagross, or that Metagross is paralyzed, that Iron Head is now significantly easier for it to break through your Metagross because it's taking the full damage each turn. Although it's unlikely that it's going to get through, Jirachi just does some crazy shit. I've seen lots of Pokemon being dropped from 100%. So generally Steel types with leftovers are going to be gold standard. Obviously other options too are like a Swampert, another fantastic option with leftovers. Zapdos, Starmie, because Starmie can paralyze. Zapdos, although it takes sand damage and is slower, it will make Jirachi burn through its Iron Head PP very quickly. All right, obviously Starmie here is faster and can Thunder Wave. You've got your own Jirachi to take Iron Heads. You've got a Swampert here. Yeah, it's just one of those Pokemon where if you don't, and that's not to say you have to have leftovers on every Steel type. You can get around it by outspeeding it. For example, like on this team here, you get around Jirachi by outspeeding it. Also, Heatran's a pretty good answer to it too. But I've seen plenty of times a Jirachi could get lucky, Thunder Wave that Heatran, and just Iron Head it down completely. So you want some kind of ways to deal with Iron Head Jirachi, because it's just like, once it gets going, it's just broken as shit. So have a good Iron Head resist that can ideally heals up when taking Iron Heads, so that each Iron Head does almost nothing. Another example too is this is a good example on Pikal's team, is here he's got to protect Suicune. And even if Sand was up, the Jirachi isn't healing on the Suicune, but if you protect, it burns 2 PP. Then at Iron Heads, it burns 2 PP. So pressure's also another good way to deal with Iron Head as well. Then lastly, we have a Scarf Pokemon on every team. Now, when I say Scarf Pokemon on every team, I don't mean Stall and Hyper Offense. They're probably 2 play styles, but in terms of like just general offense, balance, even semi-stall, starting out as a beginner, I would be running a Choice Scarf on every team. It's just, it makes life so much easier when you have a check for the Dragon Dancers. When you got something that can outspeed something like a Starmie or a Gengar or an Infernape, it just makes life so much easier. Again, moving into more advanced, you don't like even then, like still on offense teams, 95% of the time I've got a Scarfer. But you can work your way and you can build the team in a way where it doesn't need a Scarfer. But 95% of the time, you're going to be beneficial to have a Scarfer. And we look at all the teams here. Scarfer. Latias is the Scarfer. What's the Scarfer here? Flygon. Right? On Hyper Offense, you generally don't need one because all your Pokemon are generally set up sweepers, although Choice Scarf Latias is very good on Hyper Offense. 1 for the speed, but also 2 for the Healing Wish. But if you look at all these teams here, they will all, Zap Me Balance, this one doesn't have a Scarf. Actually, no, it does have a Scarfer. But this team can get away with not having a Scarfer because it has Starmie for a bit of speed control. So you can outspeed Latias, Gengar, Infernape, other Jirachis, and you've got Thunder Wave. So worst case scenario is like you can't KO the Latias, but at least you can Thunder Wave, and now you've got something else to outspeed it. And then same with the Jirachi, you're using the Body Slam as ways to get paralysis off to slow other mons down. And this team is very similar in that regards, because again you got the Thunder Wave Starmie, but you've also got Celebi, which deals with Dragon Dance Gyarados. You got Gyarados. You got Zapdos, which deals with Gyarados as well, and Dragonite to a lesser extent. So yeah, but even looking at, I think those are the only 2 teams that don't. But even looking at like obviously the Magneton balances, they almost always run a Scarf Magnezone or a Scarf Magneton. You can see here both Scarf Magnets, And on semi-stall, lots of semi-stalls will have a scarf Tyranitar or a scarf Rotom, especially if they're hazard stacking as a way to, block hazards a bit more efficiently. Also a scarf Magneton. Does this one have a scarfer? No. But in general, starting out, I'd say you're going to be beneficial to include a choice scarfer on pretty much every team, unless it's a very hard stall or very hyper offense. If you're somewhere kind of in the middle, you're going to be on a scarfer the majority of the time. Cool. So those are just the 7 rules that I would have if you're starting out. Just follow them. If you just follow those rules, you'll get something that is at least semi-decent, right? So, and again, follow these rules until you become good enough to break them. Okay? So first one is always want Stealth Rock. Okay? Stealth Rock, it's probably the number one. Number 2, 2 steel types, because you want to resist the dragon, but also steel brings to it all kinds of other good resistances too. But if you're not running 2 steels, you at least want 1 steel and Blissey or 1 steel and Tyranitar. Okay? Because they can both sponge the special dragon moves. The only issue is it'll soften you up a little bit into the physical dragon moves. 3, don't use defensive Stealth Rock weak Pokemon without spin support. Offensive Pokemon, it's okay, right? They're not meant to stick around. They're just meant to do the damage and be done with it. Although it still doesn't hurt to have spin support, but you don't need it. Number 4 is status absorption. You want to think about how your team can deal with toxic to a lesser degree, because you've got steel types. Toxic tends to not be the problem. I'd be more so thinking about toxic spikes. How do I deal with toxic spikes and not having too many Pokemon weak to that? How do I deal with Thunderwave, right? And how do I deal with Will-O-Wisp as the 2 other ones as well? And again, you do that through the typing. So like fire resists Will-O-Wisp, ground resists Thunderwave. You can do that through abilities, Magic Guard, Natural Cure, Flash Fire. You can do that through berries, like on offense, and more niche options as like Rest Talk, Heal Bell, Healing Wish in some cases. Number 5 is having 2 resistances to every type. Almost no team will have 2 resistances to every type, but do your best you can to get at least 2, and at the very minimum you want 1, right? But as you move into more intermediate team building, it's going to be more about each individual Pokemon. So thinking, okay, Tyranitar, I've got something that can beat Dragonlance, I've got something that can beat Choice Band, I've got something that can beat Scarf. With Jirachi, I've got something that can beat Thunderwave Ironhead, I've got something that can beat Super Archie, I've got something that can beat Wish Protect, right? At least 1 to 2 of that. And then as you get into advanced team building, then it becomes about combinations of Pokemon and team styles. Am I good into this team style? Am I good into this combination of Pokemon? Because you're not just thinking, I'm trying to beat Hippowdon. Hippowdon is commonly paired with Skarmory and Clefable. So when you're encountering Hippowdon, you're most likely going to be encountering them. So you can't just think, am I good into Hippowdon? Am I good into all 3 of those at once? And that just comes through experience and learning structures. Number 6, having an Ironhead resist. Otherwise, Jirachi can just eat you alive. So that's typically going to come with a steel type with leftovers. It doesn't have to be though. But those are generally the best ones. And again, like Swampert. Because the thing is, on paper, for example, like a Donphan can look good into Jirachi. Like it's immune to Thunderwave. Obviously can get paralyzed by Body Slam. But even a max defense Donphan, depending on how much attack investment the Jirachi's got, can take anywhere from probably 15 to 20%. I'm just throwing out numbers here from an Ironhead. So it only takes a bit of luck. And if you're relying on a defensive invested Donphan to beat a Ironhead Jirachi, like you're gonna be in trouble. It only takes a little bit of luck from that Jirachi, and it will clean you up. Whereas if you've got leftovers on your Metagross, or leftovers on your Heatran, or leftovers on your Swampert, Jirachi just isn't getting through it. And then obviously we talked about other ways like Zapdos, dealing pressure. And then lastly, Scarfmon. Not necessarily on stall or hyper offense, but I'd say like balanced, bulky offense, even semi-stall, is you're going to want to Scarfer the vast majority of the time. 1, to beat DDers, because DDs are just so good in this tier. Your Gyarados, your Tyranitar, and your Dragonite. Then also too, just having a way to just have some speed control where you can just beat some faster Pokemon, your Starmies, your Gengars, your Latias, your Infernapes. But another way we talked about having that speed control, I should probably change this to not a Scarfbomb, but just having some form of speed control, was also like on these Zap balances, having a fast Pokemon like Starmie that has Thunder Wave, because then that gives you a way of dealing with your Gengars, your Latias, your Infernapes. You can Thunder Wave it so a slower Pokemon can take it on. So that's it for the 7 team building rules. Okay, now I just want to share with you a few tips that you might find helpful when building your team. Okay, so first of all is there's a few big mistakes players tend to make, right? And the first one is once they find something that's good, once they build a team, they just have ADHD and just jump onto the next team. So they'll build something and eventually they will come up with something good. And then once they do come up with something good, they'll try and come up with a fresh new idea and build something else from scratch again. Once you get onto a team that you like, you want to build as many variations of it as possible. You want to flush this whole thing out. What if I changed X move? What if I changed this Pokemon to that Pokemon? Whatever, right? You can see here, I built quite a few water spams with Gyarados and Empoleon. So I've got about 6 or 7 different teams in here with Gyarados and Empoleon on water offense. And that's just 6 or 7. Those are just the good ones that I like. I've probably built 40 of them. And I just kept tweaking, like, what if I put, like, most of them started off like looking at BKC's water spam and be like, okay, what if first example, right, is this team here. So was like simply, I tried BKC's water spam team and I liked it, but it was a bit slow. So I was like, okay, what if I put Starmie over Kingdra, right? I've got a whole new team now. Also, Rapid Spin support helps Gyarados a bit. I tweaked a few Pokemon's movesets to my liking, and now I've got a completely different team. Then I'm like, okay, well, what if I do this? And that was the next variation of it is like, okay, what if instead of Latias, I put a Rotom, right? And it's just these endless little tweaks you make to the team, and out of one team, you can end up with 10 teams. And then this is just the variations with Empoleon and Gyarados that I like. I've got just as many where I've used Gyarados and Swampert and then made little tweaks to it. But the point I'm trying to make here is once you get onto something you like, tweak the fuck out of it. Like, keep playing around and making many versions of it. You'll get so many good teams once you have like a winner. You want to keep that winner and tweak it as many times. As I said, the mistake people make is they just build one good, they build, they get a winner, and then they just go on to the next idea. Once you find a winner, flush it out. Experiment with it, play it around with it, because you'll get many good teams off it. And especially, if you're just mucking around on ladder, it doesn't really matter that much. But especially if you're playing tournament play in higher level tournaments like a DPPL or an ROPL, where you're in a slot where you have to build 3 teams a week, you're not going to be able to build 3 good. I mean, you might be able to. I'm just talking from experience here. You're not going to be able to build 3 good teams a week. Well, I can't anyway. I do build 3 good teams a week, but they're from the ideas of previous teams. I'll be like, I'll just go through my builder and I'll just look at teams and be like, I could tweak this here or tweak that there. And then what happens a lot of the time is I might have fully flushed out Gyarados and Empoleon, right? I haven't built a Gyarados Empoleon team in a while. I was doing this like 12 months ago. But if I come back now and had a look in it, because I've got a bit more perspective on the tier and I've got a bit more knowledge and a bit more experience, I'll come back and be able to see things. Previously, I might have thought I'd fully flushed it out, but I'll come back with a new set of eyes and I'll have heaps of new ideas for it. So making sure you're building up your builder and keeping a good archive of teams really helps as well, because a lot of your, especially in tournament play, as I said, it's very hard to build 3 new good teams a week. I mean, you can build 3 teams a week, no worries, but 3 good teams a week, they're not going to come all from fresh ideas. They're going to come from teams that you currently have in your builder, or teams that you've seen other people use, and you're going to put tweaks on them. And then once you find that winning formula, keep tweaking it until you can no longer tweak it no more, and you might get 10 more good teams out of it. So that's tip number 1. Tip number 2 is to input the 6 before you put teams in, before you put sets in. So a mistake people make is they'll be like, all right, I want to build a team around Rest Talk Gyarados, however the fuck you say it. Ketovers. Ketovers. So Rest Talk, Waterfall, Sleep Talk. What else does it have? No, we'll just say Thunderwave. And then they'll be like, all right, I want it to be Impish and Max, whatever. Right? So they put this set in here. And then they'll be like, okay, like Donphan pairs well with that. Well, Donphan, I'm going to put, I'm going to do Leftovers. I'm just making shit up here, right? Rapid Spin. And I'm going to go, again, like Impish, 252, 252, 4. And then they go, all right, well, I want something to spin check, I want Tyranitar, because then I can trap Gengar for the spin block, right? So they put a Choice Scarf Tyranitar in, and I'm going to make my point in a minute, all right? Just be patient. Super Stone Edge, Jolly, whatever. I like to run the 4 in Special Defense. So they start building out a team like this, and each time they add in a new Pokemon, they add in the set, right? And this used to happen to me a lot, is by the time you get to the 5th Pokemon, you put in the 5th Pokemon, you're feeling really good about the team, and then you look at the team and you start to think, fuck, it's got a weakness to this, it's got a weakness to that. And then you try and find that 6th Pokemon with like that just covers everything perfectly, and you sit there looking at your builder for like an hour, and it never happens. Okay? That's because you've pigeonholed, you've created a box for your thinking, and you're stuck inside that box. Because how do you know what EVs to put on that Gyarados? Like, I've just gone in and put 252 on Impish, right? I might be actually better off with this team to be running like a careful, I just made that up, something like that. But I don't know that because I've been putting in the sets individually without any real thought to them. And sorry, I've just been putting in the sets, right? And that's boxed in my way of thinking, because now when I'm thinking of the next Pokemon, I'm thinking off these 3 sets, which it just doesn't work. You don't build good teams like that. The way you build good teams is you make the 6 first. So you get Pokemon that typically pair well together, and because you've given all the Pokemon sets already, the reason why it boxes you into that way of thinking is because you're trying to create a team with prefixed sets. It doesn't work like that. You need to look at this, make a 6, and then build a team based off that 6. Magnemite, that's some good OU stuff. And then I'd maybe be like Sizzle, right? And then what you do from here is, like, you're not thinking Rest Talk Gyarados, or you're not thinking Choice Scarf Tyranitar, is you're slowly just like building out the team. So generally I'll start with, right, with what moves the Pokemon is always going to need. So Gyarados is you're always going to want Waterfall on your Gyarados. You're always going to want Earthquake and Rapid Spin on your Donphan. You're always going to have Thunderbolt and Thunderwave on your Magneton. So I'll start off with the moves that the Pokemon always need, right? Whoops, it doesn't need Item Bullet Punch. But the point is, you're putting in the 6 first. This will help you build so much better when you start building like this, right? And then this is just how I do it. Then I'm looking at the poker paste, right? And I'm starting to see, all right, what am I actually weak to? All right, what do I need here? And then I'll just keep slowly, I'll add a little bit more, right? So actually, you know what? I think I want I'll go Rest Talk, right? Let's just see if we can build something with Rest Talk. But you just go along and you slowly input just input as you go. Because if you try and input a set all at once, or just input a Pokemon, add all the set, you end up missing the big picture. You keep your thinking very limited. And that's when you can kind of end up with teams that they look good on paper, but in battle they don't really work, because it's not just, you're not thinking each individual Pokemon, right? You put the 6 together and then you input the moves based on what the other Pokemon have and what you're trying to cover, and then that's how you build a team with synergy. I know I've explained this really poorly, and I hope you understand it. But if you just trust me on this and just start inputting just work out your 6 first. Work out the 6 first, and then start inputting the sets. And I trust you. You just trust me on this. You'll have a team that has so much more synergy, rather than you just being like the example I made starting off. I'm going to just do Restalk Gyarados. Then, okay, Restalk Gyarados pairs good with Donphan, and then you put in Donphan, you put in that set. You put in Tyranitar, you put in that set. Right? Put in the 6 and then work it all out. It'll be much more synergistic when you do it like this. And then lastly, is this kind of expands on my number 1 point, is recreate teams. Stop trying to... I see it so many times on the DPP chord where people are just trying to like build shit from scratch all the time, and then wondering why their teams suck. They're just building shit from scratch all the time. You need to, like what I said in example number 1, tip number 1 is, once you find a team that you like, create as many different versions of it as possible. So recreate teams. The other way you're going to do this too is looking at team dumps. So again, this is a sample thread, but it's technically a team dump, is look at these teams and put your own unique spin on them. Like, what, you don't even have to change up the whole team, but like, what if I used Empoleon with Wackenberry instead of Sea Incense? What if I used Empoleon with Lumberry? What if I put a Lumberry on Dragonite and put a Pasho Berry on Tyranitar? Like, little changes like that. And once you start learning these little tweaks, again, you can just create whole new teams. And then going in the DPPOU thread, there is heaps of... we scroll down a little bit further. And now some of these might be a little bit outdated, but let's go to the SPL 16 discussion thread. People drop their teams all the time in these discussion threads. Like here, from, I think it's Student of Snow. Just dropping all their teams that was used in SPL, or they built for other people, right? Go look at these teams. Go look at these teams to see how people are building, because there's been so many times where I've looked at people's teams and I've been like, oh, I've never thought of that before. I've never thought of putting that move there. I've never thought of combining those 2 Pokemons before. Because I think looking at other people's pace is a better way to learn team building than looking at replays. Replays are a bit more beneficial if you're watching the good players, learning how they play. Whereas just going and looking at pace, I believe, will get you better at team building than looking at replays. Although you can still look at replays and create people's teams. But I believe this is a better way. Like, look at take this team. What could you change on this team to make it uniquely your own? I'm sure there's heaps of little variations you could do of this, which again is my point number 1. Like find something you like and just create a ton of different spins on it. So you got all the SPL discussion threads that will have teams in them. You got Jirachi's OU Invitational team dump, where Piteous dropped all their winning teams. You got Ladon dropping all their teams in here. Like, there is just an abundance of teams. Now again, some of these are a little bit outdated, but you can put your spin on them to the current metagame. You got Bruno. He dropped his SPL teams from 2023. There is so many. I'll show you another one that I've even used a few times before. I think it's Poke Aim. On their site, the dump would have to be like 10 years old, but it's still really good. A lot of the same ideas still work today. But here, if you go to their teams and go old gens, if you scroll down, I'll show you, this is pretty cool. Oh yeah, so if you click old teams here, 2020 to 2022, there is a dump here. I don't know if I found the right one. well, this is one of them, but look at the size of this dump. Like, there would probably be like 200 teams here, and some of them, like, it got Doug Trio and shit in Marchamp, so they're a bit old. But like here, for example, Heatran, Blissey, Jirachi, Flygon, Dragonite, Starmie. Like, I'm sure that 6 could work in today. Like, there's just endless amount of like teams that you can find and put your own spin on. Don't just copy and paste the team. I mean, you can, it's not going to hurt, but learn and test them and put your own spins on them. Go find these public team dumps, and yeah, you got literally unlimited ideas between like this, what's on Smoggin. You can find team dumps in the DPP cord if you just literally search for it. I know PDC had a huge one on Pay Spin that's 10 years old, but it's still, the metagame hasn't changed that much in 10 years. Like, I didn't play from 2015 to 2025, and like I picked it up within a week, just because there's still so many of the fundamentals remain true. They always will remain true, which was the points I made at the start. Like, it's still, in 2015 you needed the Stealth Rock Pokemon. In 2015 you needed 2 Steels. You still need that today. In 2015 you needed 2 Pokemon you need Pokemon that can take status. You still need that today. So even though these builds are older, they can still be very easily tweaked to be up to date with the current metagame. So yeah, that's all I got. I know I sometimes can ramble a little bit, but yeah, find teams you like, build it, and once you find something you like, just keep hammering the shit out of it. Keep building as many variations as you can, right? Number 2, cool tip, I didn't explain it very well, but input the 6. Trust me, just trust me. And then lastly, go find team dumps and just put them all in your builder and just start tweaking with them. And then just do what you did in number 1. Just you find a winning formula, cool, make as many variations of it as possible. So that's my little DPP OU team building guide for newer players. Hope you enjoyed it, and if you have any recommendations for other videos or some feedback or anything like that, let me know, and peace.